He left her right before their wedding. 5 years later, he returns, but she has a surprise he never expected. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving exciting stories firsthand. The city of Charleston, South Carolina, was in the middle of summer when Lauren Parker and Jacob Carter met. It was the kind of love that seemed to have been written in the stars, or so Lauren believed. From the moment their eyes met in college, she knew she was lost. Jacob came from a wealthy family, with influential parents and a surname that opened doors. Lauren, on the other hand, didn't have the luxury of an easy life. Raised by a single mother who worked twice as hard to make ends meet, she learned early on the value of effort. But that never bothered her. For her, love was love, and she was completely in love with Jacob. They started dating in their second year at university. Lauren strived to be the perfect girlfriend. She helped Jacob with his homework, supported his dreams, and always put his well-being before her own. If he needed her, she was there. If he wanted to change his plans at the last minute, she adapted. If he forgot important dates, she smiled and pretended not to care. After all, he loved her. He was just absent-minded. But there was one thing about Jacob that she never wanted to see. He never had to fight for anything in life. Everything always came easy. He was used to getting everything handed to him, including her love. In his final year at university, Jacob began to change. Little things at first. He cancelled dates, took longer to reply to messages, seemed distracted even when they were together. Lauren attributed this to the stress of graduation and his family's expectations of his future. But the truth was different. Her name was Zoe Mitchell. Lauren only heard about Zoe weeks later, when Jacob casually mentioned that he had met an interesting girl through mutual friends. "She's got a free spirit," he remarked one evening as they dined at her favorite restaurant. "She's traveled to more than 15 countries on her own. She lives without a plan, without ties. I find that fascinating." Lauren smiled, but something inside her contracted. "It sounds incredible." "Yes. She took me to an underground jazz bar last week." "You'd love it, Lo, last week?" So he was seeing this girl. Lauren wanted to ask more but didn't. She didn't want to seem clingy or controlling. Jacob was free to have friends, so she just swallowed and changed the subject. But the signs began to accumulate. He started cancelling plans to go for a walk with Zoe. Suddenly he was talking about her all the time, about how she saw life differently, how she didn't stick to conventions, how spontaneous and fearless she was. Lauren looked in the mirror and saw the opposite. She was predictable, always planning everything in advance, always worried about doing the right thing. She had never stepped out of line. She had never done anything crazy or impulsive. Could it be that Jacob was bored with her? The months passed and Lauren began to feel that something was breaking between them. Jacob still treated her well, still said he loved her, but something had changed. He seemed absent, distracted, as if he was always somewhere else in another world. One night, while he was sleeping next to her, Lauren picked up his cell phone without thinking. She had never done anything like this before. Her heart was racing as she unlocked the screen and scrolled through the messages. There were dozens of conversations with Zoe. "You need to see the sunset in California with me one day. I bet you've never felt anything like it." You deserve to really live, Jake. Not just follow a script that others have written for you. She'd never understand. Lauren felt the blood drain from her face. She put her cell phone back and got out of bed, her chest tight. She walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and let the tears fall silently. She would never understand. Those words echoed in her mind. Was that what Jacob thought of her? That she was someone who would never understand what it was like to live? Lauren tried to act normal after that. She tried to believe that Jacob was still hers. But every laugh he let out when he looked at his cell phone, every time he forgot to answer her messages, every time he seemed distant, fear grew inside her. One day she finally asked, "Do you still want to marry me?" Jacob blinked, taken aback. "What?" "Of course, Lo. Why are you asking?" "Just, you seem different lately, like you're having doubts." He hesitated, and it was at that moment that Lauren realized. He was having doubts. "Jake," his voice faltered, He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I love you, Lo, but sometimes I wonder if we didn't settle down too quickly, if we shouldn't have lived longer before we got married. Lauren felt a chill run down her spine. Do you want to break up? No. He grabbed her hands, squeezing tightly. I love you. I want this wedding. I don't know. I need some time to get my head together. Some time. Lauren forced a smile and nodded. That was fine, but nothing was fine. The next few days were a torment. Jacob began to act colder, and Lauren could feel that he was distancing himself. Then, one day, it happened. She saw him. In the coffee shop where they used to have coffee together, sitting in an inconspicuous corner. Jacob and Zoe. She was laughing, tossing her hair back. He looked at her in a way that Lauren hadn't seen for months. As if Zoe was the sun, and he was being illuminated for the first time. Lauren felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't move closer. She didn't make a scene. She just left, her heart in pieces. That evening, Jacob showed up at her house, looking agitated. Lauren, we need to talk. She looked at him, her mind torn between love and pain. About what? He hesitated. I don't know if I can marry you. Silence. Lauren felt the floor disappear. And then she just whispered, You fell in love with her, didn't you? He looked away. She already knew the answer. Lauren felt as if time had stopped. Jacob was standing in front of her, his gaze hesitant, his expression guilty. The silence that filled the room was deafening. She wanted him to say something, anything, but at the same time she was afraid of the answer. The pain that rose in her chest was overwhelming, but she refused to let the tears fall. You fell in love with her, didn't you? Her voice came out lower than she wanted. Jacob looked away, ran a hand through his hair and sighed. Lauren, I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't plan it. Her reply was a short, dry, bitter laugh. You didn't plan it. She crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. But you let it happen. He didn't know what to say. Lauren felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and humiliation. The man she loved, who she believed would spend the rest of his life by her side, was there, confessing that he had fallen in love with another woman. And what was worse, he didn't even have the courage to admit it in so many words. Do you love me, Jacob? She asked suddenly. He looked at her, his blue eyes full of uncertainty. I think I do. That was all she needed to hear. Lauren felt something inside her break, an irreversible crack, a cut that could never be healed. She didn't scream, she didn't make a scene, she just took a deep breath and stepped back. So that's it, Lo, please. She raised her hand, interrupting him. No, I don't want to hear any more. You've made your choice. Jacob seemed to want to say something but couldn't find the words. He just stood there watching the woman who had been by his side for so many years walk away, closing in on herself. When he finally left, Lauren remained in the same place, staring at the closed door, feeling the weight of everything collapse on her shoulders. She refused to cry. Lauren stood there, trying to absorb what had just happened. Jacob was gone. Just like that, after years together, after everything they had built up, after promises made, he had simply chosen someone else. But deep down, she refused to believe that it was final. He was confused. Jacob didn't know what he wanted. He was in love with Zoe, but it couldn't last forever. They had a history, years of love, plans for the future. It was impossible for him to throw it all away like that without looking back. Lauren clung to that hope. She believed that after a few days away, Jacob would realize the mistake he was making, that he would miss her, that he would knock on her door in repentance, asking for forgiveness. But that hope slowly died. A few days later, Noah, their best friend since college, showed up at her house. He found Lauren on the sofa, surrounded by untouched boxes of food, with a blank look on her face. He didn't want to make her condition any worse, but he couldn't hide his tense expression. Lauren, I need to tell you something. She didn't even look at him. If it's about Jacob, I don't want to know. Noah hesitated, but he knew her too well to ignore it. He traveled with Zoe. Her head spun. What? I saw the photos. They went to California. Lauren felt a bitter taste rise in her throat. California. You need to see the sunset in California with me one day. I bet you've never felt anything like it. Zoe's sentence came back like a sharp blade in her mind. Jacob had really gone. He had embarked on that idea of life without ties, of adventure, of freedom, with Zoe. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she already knew it was true. As soon as Noah left, Lauren took out her cell phone with trembling hands and opened social media. And there it was, a sequence of photos of Jacob and Zoe, laughing, toasting with glasses of wine, walking on the beach, her jumping on his back, while he smiled in a way that Lauren barely recognized. Each image was a stab. The Jacob she knew wasn't the one there. He had always hated the beach. He always said that white wine was overrated. He'd always kept to himself on social media. But there he was, exposing his new life without bothering to spare her the pain of seeing that he had moved on. Her chest ached, and the tears came uncontrollably. But nothing prepared her for what came next. 2 days later, while she was trying unsuccessfully to avoid looking at his profile, Noah sent her a link. It was a post by Jacob, a photo of him and Zoe, the two of them looking at each other as if they were the only people in the world. And the caption, "You were the best thing that ever happened in my life." Lauren felt the floor disappear. Her cell phone slipped out of her hands. She stared at the screen, unable to breathe. It was at that moment that something inside her died. Jacob would never come back. He would never regret it. He was no longer the man she had fallen in love with, and she would never again be the woman who waited for him. With her eyes still full of tears, Lauren opened her phone settings and blocked Jacob from all her social networks. She blocked Zoe. She blocked any memory of them. She had to move on. Anger grew inside her. She let that anger motivate her. She wouldn't be the betrayed woman who waited for a man to realize he'd lost something valuable. She would be the woman who built something so great that one day Jacob would look back and regret every choice he made. But when that day came, it would be too late. Lauren wiped away her tears. The past no longer had any power over her. She was going to focus on it, on her future, and she was going to leave the rest to fate. She finally threw the wedding invitations in the trash. She sold the dress, and she promised herself that she would never again put herself second for anyone. Lauren looked around her house for the last time. Every corner of the place was impregnated with memories that now weighed on her shoulders like invisible chains. The living room where she and Jacob watched movies until late, the kitchen counter where he stole a bite of her breakfast, the bedroom where so many times she woke up to find his eyes fixed on her, telling her he loved her. But all that was now a ghost. She didn't want to be there anymore. The people around her didn't help her. No matter how well-meaning they were, every look of pity, every whispered comment about how she was holding up so well, only added to her pain. She felt like she was suffocating in that small town, where everyone knew her story, where glances met as she passed, where every corner held a piece of the life she had built alongside Jacob. She didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. She wouldn't be the woman abandoned at the altar. She would be the woman who turned things around. Without thinking twice, she bought a one-way ticket to New York. It didn't matter that she didn't have an exact plan. All that mattered was getting out of there, going to a place where no one knew her story, where she could start again without carrying the weight of the past. At the airport, while waiting for her flight, her cell phone vibrated with a message from Noah. "Are you sure about this?" Lauren took a deep breath before replying. "Yes, I need it." New York was all Lauren needed. The city gave no time for painful memories, for nostalgia, for wondering what might have been. From the moment she landed at the airport, she threw herself into the frenetic routine, determined to transform her life. The first few months were the hardest. She got a job in a luxury clothing store, where she folded dresses and helped demanding customers choose pieces that cost more than she earned in a month. By day, she worked tirelessly. At night, she worked as an extra at fashion events, helping out backstage, learning about fabrics, cuts, and trends. At first, she did it just to keep her mind off things. The busier she was, the less time she had to remember the past. But then, something changed. She realized that her efforts were being rewarded. Small pay rises came in. More opportunities came her way. She began to understand the market, to connect with influential people. For the first time in her life, she felt in control. Over time, she began to earn a little more, and without hesitation started sending money to her mother. She remembered all the times her mother had given up her own dreams to raise and support her daughter alone, and now Lauren had the chance to give something back. A few months later, when her mother decided to move to New York to be near her, Lauren realized that she was starting to build something real. They rented a modest but cozy apartment, and every night they had dinner together, talking about the day. Her mother saw the sparkle in her daughter's eyes and knew that she was finally finding herself again. Noah visited her from time to time. He never spoke Jacob's name, and she never asked. It was a silent agreement between them. But sometimes, in the pauses between conversations, in the middle of a coffee or a stroll through Central Park, she could see in his eyes that he knew more than he was letting on. "And how are things there?" she asked on one of these visits, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. "The city's still the same," he shrugged. "Some things have changed, of course, but nothing that important." She nodded, without insisting. She knew he was protecting her, and she appreciated that. Over time, her career took off. She learned to sew, to draw, to understand the details of what made a piece unique. Her creativity, combined with discipline, caught the attention of investors. Small fashion shows began to appear. Her name was circulating. She was no longer just a store assistant. 5 years later, she was no longer the same Lauren Parker. She was a successful entrepreneur. Her clothing brand was growing every day. Her name was on the covers of magazines. She finally had it all. Or so she believed, until fate decided to test whether she had really left the past behind. It was a cold night in New York when Lauren got out of the car at the entrance to one of the city's most luxurious salons. The event that night was one of the most important of the year in the fashion world. And being there meant that she had finally reached a level that, years ago, seemed impossible. Journalists, photographers, and renowned businessmen were circulating around the venue, and she knew that her presence there meant much more than just professional success. As she walked across the red carpet, she felt the weight of the moment. The dress she was wearing was one of her own creations, a light blue, elegant fabric that molded perfectly to her body. Her hair was impeccable, her gaze steady, her steps calculated. She had become the woman she had always wanted to be. But as much as she tried to ignore it, a part of her knew that this event also came with a risk. It was the first time her name had appeared alongside big investors and businessmen, people who circulated among the same elites who had once been part of her old life, people who perhaps still had ties to those she so wanted to forget. The evening went without surprises at first. Lauren greeted acquaintances, chatted about business, and felt the satisfaction of being recognized as someone of influence. But then, in the middle of the crowd, something made her heart soar. A laugh. She knew that laugh. Her body froze before her mind could even accept what was about to happen. She turned around slowly, as if she needed to prepare herself for the scene she was about to see. And then, there he was, Jacob Carter, 5 years later. She felt time stand still. Jacob was no longer the same boy she had known. His features were more mature, a little unshaven, his hair slightly messy but still impeccable. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored to his body. The way he moved still exuded the confidence he had always had, but there was something different about him now. He was no longer at his peak. She noticed it in the details. The luxury watch he used to show off was no longer there. The suit, although well cut, wasn't one of the extravagant brands he used to wear. There was a slight weariness in his gaze, as if he was carrying the weight of something he didn't want to show. But what really unsettled her was the way he looked at her when their eyes met. He stopped laughing. His expression changed completely. The confident air disappeared for a brief moment, replaced by something Lauren couldn't immediately decipher. Surprise. Admiration. Regret. The world around her kept spinning, but inside everything went silent. He recognized her. He was only a few meters away from her, and then, as if fate had made a point of torturing her, Jacob began to approach. Lauren didn't know what to expect. For years, she had imagined this moment. She thought about what she would say, how she would act, how she would feel when she saw the man who had destroyed her heart. In some versions, she was furious, spitting sharp words that would make him regret it until the last day of his life. In others, she just ignored him as if he no longer meant anything. But now, with him so close, all these simulations disappeared. She didn't know what to do. "Lauren?" His voice was almost a whisper, as if he still doubted that it was really her. She lifted her chin, keeping her expression unwavering. "Hello, Jacob." There was a moment of silence between them. A pause full of meaning, of unspoken memories, of a story that never really ended. Jacob seemed about to say something, but then a woman approached, taking his arm. Lauren knew exactly who it was before she even looked at her face. Zoe Mitchell, the woman who destroyed everything. Zoe was still beautiful, but there was something different about her too. The glow from before seemed less, as if the years had taken their toll. Her eyes landed on Lauren, and for a moment, the old rivalry resurfaced. "Jacob," Zoe interrupted, her voice laden with a false sweetness. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" Lauren smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "It's not necessary," she said calmly. "We've already met, indirectly." Zoe pressed her lips together but didn't reply. Jacob looked uncomfortable. "How are you, Lauren?" he asked, ignoring the tension. She could have said a lot of things. She could have reminded him of the day he left her. She could have asked him if he ever regretted it. She could have thrown all her success in his face, but she didn't need any of that. She had already won. "I'm fine," she simply said. And then, without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked away, leaving Jacob standing in the middle of the crowd, looking at her as if he had just lost something he should never have let go of. Noah was on the other side of the hall, watching the scene. When Lauren approached him, he arched an eyebrow. "I knew this would happen." Lauren sighed. "I shouldn't have been surprised." "How do you feel?" She thought for a moment. "I don't know," she admitted, because the truth was that, however much she had moved on, that encounter had awakened something inside her, something she thought she had buried a long time ago. But one thing was certain. Jacob Carter still had no idea how much he would regret it. Across the hall, Jacob watched as Zoe moved away to start playing, her gaze lost among the crowd. The way she smiled at the band's singer, leaning slightly closer to him, the sparkle in her eyes that he no longer saw when she looked at him. He knew that expression. He'd had it himself once years ago when he met Zoe and felt that his life was about to change. But now, all he felt was emptiness. The spell had been broken a long time ago. At first, life with Zoe seemed like a dream. The freedom to travel without a destination, to live without rules, to not be tied to a job or a fixed path. But over time, reality set in. The money he thought would last forever began to run out. His family, tired of seeing him miss out on opportunities, cut off part of their financial support. Zoe never seemed concerned, always saying that the universe would provide, that money was just a passing energy. But Jacob realized too late that the universe didn't pay the bills. Music was Zoe's only source of income now. She played guitar in bars, at events, and wherever else she could. And Jacob, who once had the world at his feet, was now there, at the same event as Lauren, but not as one of the guests. He was there because Zoe got an extra fee to play. He watched as Zoe laughed at the band's singer. She seemed amazed by him, by the way he lived. A true nomad, with no ties, no worries, just as she had always dreamed. And then Jacob knew. It was the end. He didn't fit in there anymore. He never had, in fact. He just wanted to believe that this was the right path, that escaping the stability and expectations of his old life would lead him to happiness. But now, looking at Lauren, successful, powerful, exactly where she should be, Jacob realized the truth he had avoided for years. He had made the wrong choice. Zoe came back to him, still smiling, but her gaze was distant. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew. "I think it's time we went our separate ways," she said, and for the first time he didn't feel pain when he heard those words. She smiled without resentment, gave him a light kiss on the cheek, and disappeared into the crowd. Jacob stood there for a few moments, taking it all in, until he saw Noah talking to some people near the bar. He needed to know more about Lauren. He crossed the room and stopped next to his old friend. Noah. Noah turned around slowly, watching Jacob with a cautious expression. "What do you want?" Jacob looked at the glass in Noah's hand, as if he needed a second to organize his thoughts. "You work for her, don't you?" Noah crossed his arms. "For Lauren?" "Yes. I'm a lawyer for her company." Jacob felt a tightness in his chest. So she really did it. "She's achieved a lot more than you think." Jacob let out a humorless laugh and ran a hand through his hair. "And to think I thought she'd never understand what it was like to really live." Noah arched an eyebrow. "That's funny. It seems it was you who never understood." Jacob ignored the provocation. "I want to see her." Noah showed no surprise, but his gaze became sharper. "What for?" "I want to talk to her. I want us to have a second chance." Noah laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. "Do you think you can just show up after 5 years and she'll forgive you?" Jacob held his gaze. "I know Lauren. She's always been good. She's always cared about me." Noah clutched his glass in his hands. He had always known this day would come, because he knew Lauren better than anyone. He'd been by her side when she fell, when she cried until she couldn't breathe, when she swore she'd never let anyone destroy her like that again. He saw her rebuild, become stronger, become the woman she always deserved to be. And now Jacob wanted to come into her life again? No, he wouldn't allow that. What Jacob didn't know was that Noah had always been in love with Lauren. He stood by her as a friend because he knew she needed that. He never pushed anything, never crossed any boundaries. But now, seeing him there, thinking he could just snap his fingers and have Lauren back, was unbearable. "If you really think she's going to take you back, then good luck, Jacob," Noah said, his voice calm but laden with something dark. "But I suggest you be prepared to find out that the Lauren you knew no longer exists." Jacob narrowed his eyes. "That sounds like a warning." Noah gave a small smile. "No, that's a promise." Jacob didn't reply, but he felt a chill run down his spine, because for the first time he wondered if he really knew Lauren Parker. What if she was no longer the woman who had always done everything for him? What if this time he was the one who had to fight for her? Jacob walked leisurely across the hall, feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The reunion with Lauren had been unexpected, but now he knew exactly what to do. All he needed was a chance to talk to her, to remind her of who they were before everything fell apart. He could still see her hesitating, confused, affected by his presence. And that was all he needed to know, that he still had a chance. When he stopped in front of Lauren, she stared at him with an indecipherable look. She was beautiful, sophisticated, a more powerful version of the woman he had once left behind. For a moment, he wondered if he really knew her. "You look amazing, Lauren," Jacob said, letting a smile appear on his lips. "And I'm not just saying that because of the dress. You've really conquered everything, haven't you?" She held his gaze, her eyes as cold as he'd ever seen them before. "And you? How are you?" Jacob knew that question was loaded with intent. She wanted to know where he was, how he was living, what had happened over the last few years. And he didn't want her to know the truth. He didn't want her to know that his life was a mess, that his bank account was practically empty, and that he didn't even have a decent place to spend the night. "I've experienced a lot," he deflected, not wanting to go into detail. "But nothing that compares to what you've achieved." Lauren arched an eyebrow, as if expecting more. He took a deep breath. He needed to play that card. "Zoe has moved on," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "We're finished here. She's playing today, with the band's singer, and tomorrow she's going on the road with him. They're enchanted. That's how she lives." That information made Lauren blink a few times. It was a small detail, but Jacob noticed. She was no longer the naive woman who had once waited for him, but she still cared. She still got upset. "How did you manage to live like this?" Lauren asked, crossing her arms. Jacob felt a twinge in his chest. "I thought it was what I wanted, but some things have to change." She didn't answer. She just stood there, studying him, as if trying to understand if he was being sincere. It was time for the final blow. "What do you say we meet tomorrow? We can talk better, without all these people around." Lauren hesitated. He saw the internal battle she was fighting, and then, to his surprise, she nodded. "Okay." Jacob hid his smile of victory. He was back in the game. Without wasting any time, he left the event soon after. He took the rest of the money in his pocket and rented a hostel for the night. The place was small and cramped, but it would do. He just needed a few hours' sleep before the big day. Tomorrow he would win Lauren back. It was all a question of time. He knew exactly what to do: a romantic dinner, a sophisticated restaurant, a few right words. Lauren had always been sweet, had always loved him more than anything. And now, seeing her success, Jacob knew he needed her more than ever. With the right words, he would have his life back. And maybe, just maybe, he could finally put this unstable phase behind him. The following evening, Jacob adjusted what jacket he could, looked at himself in the reflection of the shop window, and entered the restaurant. It was a chic, luxurious place, the kind he used to go to back in the day when money was never a concern. He sat down at a reserved table, ordered a drink, and waited. With every passing minute, his heart beat faster. He was about to get it all back. Now, all that was left was for Lauren to arrive. Jacob stared at the entrance to the restaurant, his eyes attentive to every movement. Every time the door opened, his heart raced, waiting to see Lauren cross the hall. He straightened his jacket, checked his hair in the reflection of the silver spoon, and forced himself to smile. He was nervous, but it was only a matter of time before everything returned to normal. Lauren had always been a generous, understanding woman, someone who put others before herself. She really loved him before. And deep down, he believed that there was still a part of her that loved him now. Then finally she appeared, and he held his breath. Lauren entered the restaurant with sure steps, her posture impeccable, her confidence evident in every movement. The dress she was wearing highlighted her natural elegance, but it was something else that caught his eye. She was holding a black briefcase. Jacob frowned. That wasn't part of the plan. She approached the table without haste and sat down opposite him, placing the folder on the table before looking at him with a serene gaze. "You look beautiful, Lauren," he said, letting his voice come out softly, as if he were returning to the intimacy of earlier times. "Thank you for coming." She gave him a small smile, but there was no emotion in it. "Let's get straight to the point, Jacob." He blinked a few times, surprised by her coldness. Well, I wanted to talk to you, put some things right. I think we deserve this talk after everything." "After everything?" she repeated, crossing her arms on the table. "Yes. I know I've made mistakes, but looking at you now, seeing how far you've come, it makes me realize how special you've always been." She took a deep breath and shook her head. "Jacob, I didn't come here to give you hope for a new relationship." He swallowed dryly. "What do you mean? I would never have anything to do with you again." The words were a direct hit, and he felt his stomach turn. "Lauren, I've grown up, I've evolved, and a lot of what I have today, I can say you contributed without even knowing it." Jacob frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward slightly, her voice firm but calm. "After you left me, with the wedding dress bought, the party all organized, and the invitations ready, I thought my world was over. But I drew strength from where I didn't even know I had it, and started my life all over again. Today I'm here, reaping the rewards of my hard work and dedication, and you left me, Jacob. But, ironically, that's what motivated me to chase my dreams, and finally, put myself first." Jacob opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at him with a firmness he had never seen before. There was no hurt, no resentment. There was something even worse: indifference. He felt a pang of despair grow inside him. "So why did you come here today? I thought you might give me a second chance." Lauren then picked up the folder and calmly opened it, pulling out some papers. "What I can do for you today is offer you a job at my company." Jacob's eyes widened. "What? I know you don't have any money and you need to stay here in New York, so if you want, I have an opening available in the stock organization department." She slid the papers across the table to him. "It's all here, the contract, the conditions, the salary. If you accept, you can start on Monday." Jacob felt his face heat up. "Lauren, is this serious? Are you really offering me a job as a stock organizer?" "Yes, that's what I can do for you." Anger and humiliation mixed inside him. "But that's humiliating." Lauren smiled slightly, and there was something almost cruel in her expression. "Well, now you know how I felt 5 years ago. Jacob felt the impact of those words like a punch in the gut. He looked down at the papers on the table. Part of him wanted to get up and leave, but the other part, more desperate, more realistic, knew he had no choice. He picked up the pen and signed. When he had finished, he looked at Lauren, expecting her to show some satisfaction at having him there on her terms. But she just took the papers back, put them in her briefcase, and stood up. He felt panic take over. "Lauren, I know you still have feelings for me. You may deny it, but I saw the way you were upset when you heard that Zoe and I had broken up. I know you. I know that deep down, you miss what we had." She stopped, leaned over slightly, and placed a light kiss on his cheek. "You taught me not to trust empty promises, Jacob," she whispered. "I hope you learn from your mistakes." She took a step back, ready to leave, but then gave him one last look and added, "Oh, and I've already paid the bill. You can finish your dinner." And then, without another word, she turned away, leaving Jacob sitting there, alone, feeling the weight of true regret for the first time in his life. He had lost the only woman who was really worth it. And now it was too late. Lauren left the restaurant with firm steps, without looking back. The cold wind of the New York night blew against her face, as if it wanted to carry away any remnants of the past that still remained inside her. Noah was leaning against the car, his arms crossed, watching her with that attentive gaze of someone who always knew exactly what she needed, even when she didn't know it herself. She got into the car and closed the door softly, letting out a long sigh. "I've finished a cycle," she said, without looking away from the window. "I feel calmer now." Noah just nodded and started the car, leaving the parking lot without asking any questions. He knew Lauren would talk when she was ready. The drive to her house was silent. Lauren stared out of the window, watching the city lights shine as if they were celebrating her liberation. She felt no anger, no hatred. There was only immense relief, as if she had spent years carrying a weight and now she could finally breathe. When they arrived at her house, Lauren threw herself onto the sofa, feeling her body relax. Noah entered soon after, closing the door behind him. He watched her for a moment, noticing the tension still present in her shoulders. Without saying anything, he walked over and stood behind her, placing his firm hands on her shoulders and starting a gentle massage. "You're tense," he murmured. His touch was warm, gentle. Lauren felt a shiver run across her skin. It was a different kind of touch, one that conveyed security and affection, something she hadn't felt for a long time. Noah continued the massage for a few moments, until Lauren tilted her head back, looking at him. Their eyes met. There was something there that she had never noticed before, something that had always been there but that she had never really seen. Noah took a deep breath and walked over to her, kneeling down beside her. "I need to tell you something, Lauren." She swallowed dryly, feeling her heart racing without understanding exactly why. "What was it?" He hesitated for a second, as if gathering the courage to finally say something he'd been holding back for too long. "I love you." The air seemed to disappear from her lungs. "Noah, I've loved you since college," he continued, his voice firm but charged with emotion. "I always have. But you were with Jacob, and I never wanted to interfere. All I wanted was to see you happy, even if that meant never having you for myself." Lauren felt a knot forming in her throat. Images began to appear in her mind, like flashes from a movie she never realized she was watching. She remembered the countless times Noah had been by her side, silently watching over her. She remembered when she was devastated, locked in her room with no strength to leave, and he showed up with hot tea and a book that he said would help distract her. She remembered when she cried herself to sleep and woke up to a note from him next to her bed, telling her that she was stronger than she had imagined. She remembered when she thought she would never be able to smile again, and he did everything he could to get a laugh out of her, even for a second. Love was always there, and she never saw it. Noah reached up and gently touched her face. "I never expected anything in return, Lauren. I just wanted you to know that." She didn't know what to say. Her heart was pounding, her head was spinning. It was as if everything was finally falling into place. Without thinking, she just followed the impulse that was growing inside her. She leaned forward, and Noah's lips met hers. The kiss began hesitantly, as if they both needed to confirm that it was real, that they were finally crossing the line that had seemed insurmountable for so long. But then it became deep, intense. It was unlike anything Lauren had ever felt. It was right. When they parted, Noah leaned his forehead against hers, smiling slightly. "Does this mean I have a chance?" Lauren laughed, feeling genuine happiness fill her chest. "I think it does." The next morning, she woke up with a lightness she hadn't felt for years. For the first time, the past wasn't weighing on her shoulders. The future looked bright. On Monday, however, one thing caught her eye. Jacob didn't show up for his first day of work. She knew immediately that he wouldn't show up. Jacob Carter would never accept that humiliation. And she was right. Instead of facing reality, he chose to run away. He packed his bags and returned to his parents' house, trying to somehow rebuild what was left of his life. But he knew deep down that he would never get back what he had lost. He realized too late the value of what he had left behind. Lauren got on with her life, growing more and more. Her company reached heights she had never imagined. But more than that, she found peace. She found someone who truly valued her, and for the first time she knew what it was like to be truly loved. Meanwhile, Jacob Carter learned the biggest lesson of his life. Never underestimate the love of someone who really cares, because one day you may realize the value of that person, but they'll be gone forever. End. What did you think of this story full of twists and turns and overcoming? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and watch the video that appears on the screen. See you in the next video.